The house felt unbearably silent after the funeral. Every corner was heavy with memories, like shadows cast by a life that had quietly slipped away. I sat alone at the dining table, staring at a half-finished cup of coffee, feeling more lost than I had ever imagined possible. The weight of loneliness wrapped around me like a thick, unrelenting fog. Just when I thought the night might swallow me whole, there was a soft, hesitant knock at the door. I hesitated. Confused, cautious. Grief had a way of making even the simplest things feel foreign. When I opened the door, I found Jason, my son's best friend, standing there. He looked different beneath the porch light. Gone was the lanky teenager, who used to raid our refrigerator and fall asleep in the living room after video game marathons. He stood taller now, his shoulders broader, his face marked by something deeper, experience, perhaps. A quiet wait. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cool night air pressed around us, thick with things left unsaid. "I'm sorry for your loss," he finally said, his voice deeper and more grounded than I remembered. I nodded. No words came. Grief had taken so much, my husband, my laughter, my sense of home. And now, even my voice. Jason shifted awkwardly, holding a small container in his hands. "I brought you something," he said, holding it out. A simple, homemade casserole. It was such a small gesture, and yet, it undid me completely. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping aside to let him in. The house seemed to welcome him in, swallowing him whole like it had been starved for life and sound. He placed the casserole gently on the counter, then turned to face me. Concern softened the lines of his face. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly, his eyes locking onto mine with such sincerity, I felt exposed. "Surviving," I replied. The word broke on my tongue. He hesitated, then reached out and touched my hand. Not out of obligation, but with quiet steadiness, like he was trying to anchor me to something real. I flinched, not from the touch, but from how much I needed it. I had been drifting in a sea of silence, and here was someone, unexpected, yet familiar, offering a lifeline. "I just didn't want you to feel alone tonight," he said, his voice low. "I know how quiet it gets." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears I hadn't even realized were there. "Thank you for remembering," I said. "Most people don't know what to say. So they say nothing." Jason nodded. Sometimes silence says too much. We sat for a while, not speaking. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with mutual grief, with memories of my son, with the echo of happier times. Eventually, I poured us both some tea. We sat side by side at the kitchen table, steam curling between us like a quiet bridge. "I miss him too," Jason said softly, his eyes misty. I reached over and placed my hand on his. It was my turn to offer grounding. "He loved you like a brother," I said. We talked then, about childhood sleepovers, inside jokes, scraped knees, and the boy who had tied our lives together. The hours passed unnoticed. The heaviness didn't vanish, but it softened around the edges. When Jason finally stood to leave, I walked him to the door. He paused before stepping out into the night. "I'll come by again, if that's okay," he said. "It is," I said, my voice steadier now. "Thank you for reminding me I'm not invisible." He smiled, a quiet, respectful smile that said more than words ever could. Then he was gone. I stood in the doorway for a long while, staring out into the dark. For the first time in days, I didn't feel entirely alone. And that, somehow, felt like the beginning of healing. Sorrow lived in every inch of me, but something inside resisted being completely consumed by it. I needed connection. I needed someone to remind me that I was still alive. "Do you want me to stay for a bit?" Jason asked, his voice low and tentative, as if afraid of overstepping. I looked around the empty house, the photo frames still hanging on the walls, untouched, sacred. The silence had returned, pressing on my chest like a weight I couldn't lift. "Yes," I said, the word leaving my lips before I could second-guess it. "Please." We moved to the living room, a space that once overflowed with laughter, and now held both comfort and sadness. Jason sat on the edge of the couch, while I curled up on the opposite end, pulling a worn throw blanket over my lap. For a while, we said nothing. The soft hum of the refrigerator, and the occasional creak of the old house were the only sounds. Yet his presence brought warmth, like a single candle in a room that had long been dark. It was strange how natural it felt, having him there. He was like a bridge between what I had lost and the unfamiliar path ahead. We began talking, first about simple things, his new job, the neighborhood, how much had changed since he'd gone off to college. His voice carried the ease of someone who wasn't trying to fix me, only accompany me. Slowly, our words moved to deeper waters. He asked about my husband, what I missed most. It was a simple question, but it cracked something inside me. The walls I had built around my grief buckled, and I began to speak. Really speak. I told him about the late-night laughter that used to fill the halls. About quiet mornings, coffee in hand, shared in content silence. I spoke of the way a single glance could hold entire conversations. Jason didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions. He simply listened. So wholly, so presently, that it made my chest ache. And when the words ran out, when silence settled once again, this time softer, he leaned forward, his voice gentle but sure. "You are allowed to miss him," he said, "and still need someone." The words hit me like a wave, truthful, raw, and merciful. My eyes closed against the swell of emotion. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. When I opened them, he was closer now. The light cast shadows across his face, but his eyes shone, clear, kind, without pity. There was only understanding there. No demands. No pressure. Just a quiet offering of presence. Of comfort. For a moment, I felt like I stood on the edge of something uncertain. Not dangerous in a romantic sense, but fragile. Sacred. A space that could either help me begin to heal, or remind me just how broken I still was. My heart thudded, uncertain, yet still willing to feel. It had been so long since someone had looked at me, not with pity, not with obligation, but with care. As though I mattered. As though I hadn't disappeared into my grief completely. My breath caught. Not because I felt anything I wasn't ready to feel. But because, for the first time in a long while, I felt seen. And that, quiet and simple, was everything. There was something quietly electric in the space between us, a tension not born from desire, but from awakening. A kind of presence. A reminder that I was still here, still capable of feeling. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to wonder. What if moving forward didn't mean forgetting? What if it could mean finding something new, something gentle and healing, within the ruins of all I had lost? Jason must have seen the shift in my expression, because a slow, tentative smile curved across his face. It was a quiet smile, the kind that carries 1,000 unspoken promises. Promises of patience. Of presence. Of not turning away. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not dread. Not numbness. Life. I didn't know where this night would lead. But for once, I wasn't afraid. I was alive. And I was ready to feel again. Jason shifted slightly, and in doing so, his knee brushed against mine. The contact was accidental, fleeting. But it sent a soft jolt through me, waking parts of myself I thought had withered away. I could have moved. Pulled back. Pretended the moment hadn't happened. But I didn't. I stayed. Letting the warmth of that touch seep into the hollow, cold places inside me that grief had carved out. Jason's eyes searched mine, not pushing, not assuming, just watching. He gave me space, gave me every chance to retreat if I needed to. He asked for nothing. Demanded nothing. Still, I stayed. Without quite realizing what I was doing, I reached out. My hand trembled as I let my fingers find his, tentatively, carefully, curling lightly around his. His hand was warm, solid, and slightly calloused. A grounding presence. In response, he gently turned his palm upward and intertwined our fingers, slowly, like someone cradling something fragile. The gesture was so simple, yet it struck something deep inside me. I had forgotten what it felt like to be touched like that. Not out of obligation. Not out of politeness. But out of genuine care. Out of stillness. Out of presence. Jason moved just a little closer, as though the distance between us had become too heavy to bear. Slowly, he lifted one hand and reached toward me. He brushed a stray strand of hair away from my face, tucking it behind my ear. His fingertips barely grazed my skin, but the gentleness of the act sent a quiet shiver down my spine. For a long moment, he simply looked at me. And in his gaze, there was no expectation, only understanding. Only the kind of compassion that's earned through shared silence and unspoken grief. "You're still beautiful," he said softly, his voice tinged with awe. The words hit harder than I expected. No one had said that to me in years, not like that. Not with such raw, unfiltered sincerity. Not like it meant something deeper than appearance. Like it acknowledged the strength it took just to keep going. Tears stung at the backs of my eyes, but I blinked them away. Not because I was ashamed of them, but because I wasn't ready to cry again. Not yet. Instead, I leaned into his hand. Let him cradle my cheek in his palm, steady and kind. The world outside the walls of that room began to fade, the grief, the aching silence, the endless days of emptiness. For a fleeting, fragile moment, there was only this, the quiet comfort of being seen, and the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet. Not love. Not recovery. Not even hope. Just connection. And for now, that was enough. The world outside, the endless blur of meaningless condolences, the sympathetic smiles that never quite reached the eyes, all of it faded. In that moment, there was only Jason. Only me. And the aching possibility suspended quietly between us. He moved closer, and I could feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek. But he didn't rush. He paused, lingering, his eyes full of hesitation, offering me one last chance to pull away, to close the door. But I didn't want to. Instead, I leaned in, resting my forehead against his. It wasn't a kiss. It was something quieter. Something more profound. The kind of closeness you don't get to share unless grief has torn away every wall you once held. We stayed like that, forehead to forehead, eyes closed, breathing in sync, as if trying to borrow strength from one another. His arms came around me then, wrapping me in a firm, steady embrace. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt held. Truly, deeply held. Not as a widow. Not as someone broken. But simply as a person in need of comfort. I buried my face into his shoulder and let myself be there, in his arms, allowing the silence between us to speak what I couldn't. My heart pounded, not from excitement, but from something rawer, the realization that I had spent so many days merely surviving, never expecting to feel warmth like this again. He pulled back slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. His gaze was steady and full of concern. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, as if even this simple closeness might be too much. I nodded, blinking away fresh tears. "I'm okay," I whispered, my voice catching. "I just needed to not feel alone." He nodded too, understanding without pressing for more. "Come on," he said gently, guiding me to my feet. "You should rest. I'll stay until you fall asleep, if that's all right." We walked slowly upstairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from fear, but from the weight of everything unspoken. It wasn't about romance. It wasn't about desire. It was about needing someone in the dark. When we reached my bedroom, I hesitated at the door. The room had held so much sorrow. It smelled like absence and memory. Jason stopped beside me. "You don't have to be alone in this," he said. His words settled into the deepest corners of me. I sat down on the edge of the bed and reached for the folded cardigan draped over my shoulders. My fingers fumbled with the buttons until Jason knelt in front of me and gently helped me slip it off. His touch was careful, reverent, like handling something fragile. "You've carried so much," he murmured. And just like that, the tears I'd held back all evening finally spilled. Silent, warm tears slid down my cheeks as I looked at him. "I miss him," I said, the words escaping in a breath. "I know," he whispered, his voice cracking a little. "I miss him too." He sat beside me, not saying anything more. Just sat, close enough to lean on, strong enough to share the burden. Eventually, I lay back on the bed, and Jason stretched out a blanket over me. He didn't try to climb in or hover, or turn the moment into anything more. He just settled into the armchair nearby, arms folded across his chest, his head tilted back, eyes watching over me. As I drifted toward sleep, my last waking thought wasn't about loss. It was about gratitude. For this night. For this comfort. For someone who stayed. And in the quiet of the dark, I finally exhaled. Not because the grief was gone, but because I didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Every piece of that night, every quiet word, every glance, every shared breath, felt like shedding an old life. A heavy one. One burdened with grief, with silence, with the weight of days spent pretending to be whole. When Jason touched me, it was not with urgency or desire. It was with something far deeper, a gentleness born of understanding. Each moment we shared was a balm to wounds I hadn't dared show the world. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't look away. He saw me. And he made me feel, deep in my bones, that I was not broken beyond repair. There was a sacredness to the way we sat beside each other, hands still entwined, hearts slowly beating in unison. There was no need for grand declarations or promises of forever. In that moment, what we had was enough. His voice broke the quiet, low and sure. "You are not alone anymore." The simplicity of it shattered something inside me, and then healed it. I had spent so many months carrying grief like armor, believing that being strong meant being solitary. But now, nestled in the safety of his presence, I realized that true strength sometimes meant allowing someone else to carry a little of the weight with you. Wrapped in his warmth, I allowed myself to breathe. Not the shallow kind of breath I'd grown used to, but the kind that reached all the way to the heart, the kind that whispered maybe you're going to be okay. That night, I didn't dream of sorrow or absence. I dreamed of possibility. The next morning, soft light filtered into the room, brushing the walls with a gentle glow. The quiet hum of morning stirred around me, the creak of wood, the rustle of leaves outside the window, the occasional chirp of a bird just beginning its song. For a moment, I stayed still, not wanting to break the fragile peace. I expected to open my eyes and find the space beside me cold, the silence returned. But he was still there. Jason lay beside me, his arm resting protectively across my waist, his breathing deep and steady against my hair. And for a heartbeat longer, I simply existed. No questions. No doubts. Just this, the warmth of his presence and the quiet truth of being held. My heart ached, but not with grief. With something softer. Something like hope. Still, as the light grew stronger, reality began to stretch itself awake within me. What now? What did this mean, this connection, this comfort, this moment of safety? Was it just a single night of companionship between two aching souls? Or was it the beginning of something new? I shifted gently, careful not to wake him, and stared at the ceiling. My mind had already begun unraveling the tangled threads of memory and meaning. I could feel the weight of the world waiting outside that door. The grief, the responsibilities, the unanswered questions. But I also knew something had changed. The loneliness hadn't vanished, but it had been seen, acknowledged, and held. And somehow, that made it easier to bear. Jason stirred then, blinking against the light. His eyes met mine, still soft from sleep, and he gave me a sleepy smile. Hey. That one word, hey, held more care than most entire conversations I'd had in months. Hey, I whispered back. We didn't need more. Not yet. There would be time to figure out what this all meant, what path it would take. But for now, we were two people who had walked through sorrow and found, unexpectedly, a little light in each other. Reality, as it always did, demanded to be acknowledged. I was older, wounded, carrying a lifetime of memories, of grief and resilience. Experiences that Jason, young and unscarred by time's harsher lessons, could not possibly understand. What we shared last night had been beautiful, almost sacred, but fragile, like a delicate cocoon spun in the dark. Could it survive beyond the quiet safety of that night? The question settled on my chest like a heavy stone, cold and unyielding. Fear crept in slowly, insidiously, filling the cracks in my heart with uncertainty. Doubts whispered cruel possibilities. Jason stirred beside me, sensing the tension I hadn't been able to hide. His fingers brushed lightly down my arm, warm and steady. Penny for your thoughts, he murmured, voice still thick with sleep. I smiled sadly, tracing idle patterns on his chest with my fingertips. How could I explain the storm inside me? How could I tell him I was terrified? Terrified that no matter how tender, how sincere, part of me was convinced this was temporary. A beautiful illusion that daylight would inevitably shatter. I was just thinking, I said softly, choosing my words carefully, last night felt too good to be real. Jason lifted my chin gently, forcing me to meet his eyes. There was no hesitation there. No flicker of regret. Only unwavering sincerity. It was real, he said firmly. Every second of it. But doubts still nodded at me from the shadows of my mind. What would people think if they knew? Would they see me as desperate, pathetic, clinging to a fleeting touch to soothe my loneliness? Would Jason one day wake up, look at me with clearer eyes, and realize he deserved someone younger, less complicated? I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, as if I could shield my heart from the inevitable hurt. Sensing the shift in me, Jason sat up slightly, propping himself on one elbow. You're overthinking again, he said with a gentle smile. You do that when you're scared. I blinked, surprised at how easily he read me. Maybe I am scared, I admitted quietly. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you, I whispered. I don't want to be a mistake you regret. His face softened. He reached out, cupping my cheek with a tenderness that made my breath catch. His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't even realized had fallen. You are not a mistake, he said firmly. You're the bravest, most beautiful woman I know. Last night wasn't about filling a void. It was about finding something real. I wanted so badly to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But old wounds had a way of whispering lies in the quiet moments, lies about worth and timing and whether I deserved happiness. I turned my face into his palm, soaking in his warmth, trying to quiet the voices of doubt swirling inside me. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason's eyes held mine, steady and sure. Now, we take it one moment at a time, he said softly. No pressure. No rush. Just, being here. Being present. His words, simple and honest, felt like a fragile lifeline. I nodded slowly, knowing the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But for the first time in a long while, I dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, I could learn to walk it with someone else beside me. Someone who saw me, not just the scars, but the strength beneath. And maybe, in time, that was enough. When the world comes back in, when it is not just you and me in the safety of this room, I whispered, voice trembling with the weight of unspoken fears. Jason hesitated, as if carefully weighing his next words. The vulnerability, in that pause made my heart ache even more. I don't have all the answers, he admitted quietly, his gaze steady. But I know what I feel. And I am not walking away from this, from you. His words settled over me like a gentle storm, soothing, but unable to erase the ache of uncertainty that lingered deep within my soul. Later, as we dressed and moved through the motions of an ordinary morning, an unspoken heaviness hung between us, thick and tangible. Every casual brush of his hand, every lingering glance, was charged with the awareness that something profound had shifted between us. We were no longer just two lonely souls finding temporary solace. We were tethered now, in a way that scared me as much as it comforted me. A sudden knock at the door startled us both. Jason glanced at me, silently asking if I wanted him to answer it. I shook my head, pulling on my sweater and smoothing down my hair. Whoever it was could wait. I needed a moment to gather myself. To decide how much of last night's fragile magic I was willing to let the world see. But deep down, I knew the real battle was not against the opinions of others. It was against my own fear. Fear of being vulnerable again. Fear of daring to hope. Fear of opening my heart to something I could not control. Jason came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin gently on my shoulder. Whatever comes next, he said quietly, voice warm and sure, we face it together. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a promise I hadn't even realized I needed so badly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself lean into that promise. I let myself believe. Not in fairy tales or perfect endings, but in the messy, beautiful possibility of something real. Something worth fighting for. The days that followed were not easy, but they were real. There were moments of hesitation, second-guessing, and questioning whether this fragile thing between us could survive beyond that one night. But Jason never wavered. When I pulled away out of fear, he pulled me back with patience and quiet understanding. When doubt clouded my heart, he reminded me with simple gestures and steady words that love does not always arrive the way we expect it to. Sometimes it comes quietly, slipping through the cracks of a broken heart, and settling gently in the spaces we thought were too damaged to ever hold light again. We shared laughter that surprised me, soft and tentative, but genuine. We shared silence that felt less like emptiness and more like a breath, a space where healing could quietly begin. Yet, as the world crept back into focus, so did the inevitable challenges. There were questions from friends, awkward conversations with neighbors who had known my husband. There were moments when the weight of grief pressed down harder, threatening to undo all the fragile progress. And there were nights when I lay awake, haunted by memories, afraid of what the future might hold. But through it all, Jason remained my anchor. He never demanded answers I didn't have. He never rushed the healing that was mine to navigate. Instead, he stood beside me, steady, patient, unwavering. Slowly, I began to realize that healing was not about forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the past, or pretending the sorrow had never existed. Healing was about learning to carry that sorrow differently. About finding the strength to make room in my heart for both the pain and the possibility of joy. Jason's presence was a quiet reminder that love could take many shapes. It could be tender and gentle, steady and true. It could be messy and imperfect, but still deeply real. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. With every passing day, I grew more willing to step out of the shadows of grief and into the light of this new, uncertain chapter. I wasn't ready to erase the past, or to rush toward some imagined perfect future. But I was ready to embrace the messy, beautiful present. To hold on to moments of connection. To allow myself to hope again. To believe that after so much loss, life could still surprise me with unexpected beauty. And as Jason's hand found mine, warm and steady, I knew I was not walking this path alone anymore. Together, we would face whatever came next. One fragile, hopeful step at a time. Our connection grew quietly, planting itself stubbornly and beautifully against all odds. We kept what we shared private, a sacred space that belonged only to us. We savored the small moments that no one else knew about, the lingering glances across crowded rooms, the brief but meaningful touches that spoke louder than words, and the late-night conversations that stitched together the broken, wounded parts of our souls. Each whispered secret, each shared vulnerability became a thread weaving us closer, fragile but unbreakable. There were challenges, of course. Doubts crept in, fears whispered their warnings, and the weight of the past sometimes threatened to pull us back into the shadows. But we met every challenge hand in hand, steady and determined. We understood that what we had was not perfect, far from it, but it was honest. Jason never once made me feel like a burden or a mistake. Instead, he made me feel seen. Wanted. Loved, not despite my scars, but because of them. His acceptance was a balm for wounds I had long hidden, a light shining on parts of myself I thought unlovable. One evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the world in soft, golden hues, Jason took my hand gently in his. His eyes, full of quiet emotion, met mine. "You saved me too," he said softly. His words caught in my throat. A smile broke through the tears that welled up in my eyes. In that moment, I realized this was not just about healing old wounds. It was about building something new. Something neither of us had dared to dream of. But both of us needed, more than we had ever known. Together, we were learning to trust again. To believe that love could grow in unexpected places, even in the soil of grief and loss. Our journey was not defined by perfection or fairy tale endings. It was defined by resilience. By courage. By the fierce, tender hope that something real could take root and flourish. Each day, we planted seeds of patience and understanding, nurturing them with kindness and truth. And slowly, against the odds, something beautiful was growing. Something neither of us expected. Something that felt like home.